Philadelphia is the greatest place ever. I was fortunate to raise my kids here, have my career. I love it. But Philadelphia, to me, is the 75-watt light bulb that's between the 100-watt light bulb in New York and Washington. We're not the nation's capital. We're not the business and entertainment center of the world. We have these two big sister cities looking down at us, and therefore we're not them. So I think that was the inferiority complex that we get a little bit, and the national media will play into. I love this town and always have. And as I said, I'm just privileged to have lived here and to have been able to work here for all these years.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. James here with another episode of the Dr. James Show. I am ecstatic to welcome our guest today. Not too often have I brought on my heroes. I don't have too many heroes, but our guest today, I've been reading his work, reading his books, watching him on TV, listening to him on the radio for a while. And for him to make the time to join us it's surreal. His name is Glen Macnow. You can see that Glen is a radio talker, TV host, beer slinger, and PR consultant. And Glen is our guest today. So Glen Macnow, the professor, welcome to the Dr. James Show.
Thank you, Dr. James. My pleasure to be here.
All right. I'm sure this is different because you're the one who's typically doing the interviewing. So now this time you get to sit on the other side and share your wisdom that way. I read your title, TV host, radio show host, beer entrepreneur. I mean, there's so many things you do. I can't wait to unpack. But in your words, who is Glen Macnow? Who are you?
Oh, wow. I'm somebody who really appreciates the opportunities that I've had over the years. I mean, my job is they pay me to talk about sports, go to games, drink beer, and watch TV. So I am a very, very blessed man who's got a terrific family and friends and counts my lucky stars every day.
Wow, life is hard. Life is hard. Now, when you were in New York, then Buffalo, then Philly, is this what you anticipated your life would be? Or when was the shift? When was the shift?
So I grew up the son of a commercial artist. My dad was an artist, and I wanted to do that early. And when I was a kid and when I went through high school, really into college, my goal was I was going to study art, and that's what I began doing. And then when I went to college in Boston, there were so many other things that interested me that I was one of these kids who went through about 5 majors in 2 years. I ended up taking a journalism class taught by an old-time magazine guy named Professor Tim Cohane.
Wow.
He had been an editor at Look magazine, which nobody remembers anymore. It was a magazine back in the day. And he told me, he said, you can do this. He said, you've got a book or two in you. You could make a career at this. And that it really, I didn't know I was any good, and it really inspired me. And I began writing. I initially I was a political reporter. I went into that. I went into covering cops and fires and city councils and schools. And then I became a political reporter down in Florida in my 20s. I always loved sports as a kid, kind of wanted to keep my passion for sports separate from my work for sports. But after a while, for reasons maybe we'll get into in a bit, I kind of fell into it.
So you had a passion for sports. So you followed it throughout your childhood and early adulthood. You still had your hands in sports.
Oh, I was one of these kids, who from the age of 7, when I turned on the TV and saw the Buffalo Bills playing football, that was the greatest thing in the world. And when I was 8 years old, Sandy Koufax was in the World Series, and that was an astounding thing to me. So, yeah, the interesting thing is normally sports is handed down generations. Your grandfather, your father, your father. I made my dad a sports fan. My dad was not.
Wow.
I dragged him to a football game, and he ended up being the season ticket holder later on.
Wow. Wow. That's Mr. Marv, right?
Yeah, it's my dad, Big Marv, still kicking at 92. There he is. He was watching his Buffalo Bills the other day. His heart was broken for the 60th straight year, but he keeps going with it.
I love it. I love it. I already knew you were really good at what you do. And I was listening to the segments every Saturday when you and Ray Didinger, and we'll speak about that later, did the Tell Us Your Story. And one of the guests, I don't know if it ever came to fruition, was my favorite Philadelphia Philly of all time. And no one talks about him. He was traded to the San Francisco Giants for Gary Maddox. Number 27, Guillermo Montanez, Willie the Philly. And I heard that you were going to have him on, and I didn't hear anything after that. Did you ever get him?
I didn't get him for that. I actually got him for something else I was doing. I was writing for Jersey Man magazine for a while.
Yes.
I interviewed him for that, and he was a lot of fun. It's funny, I caught him. He was down in Puerto Rico doing grandfather duty.
Wow.
And as I was talking to him, he kept having like a little 5-year-old running around in the background distracting him. But he was a charming and lovely man and a lot of fun. The original hot dog with mustard, Willie Montanez.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't get him for Tell Us Your Story, but I have interviewed him, and he's a really charming guy.
We can talk offline. I would love to get his contact information so I can send him something, but he was my first baseball hero. Reggie Jackson, number 2, but number 27. I wore 27 in Little League. Willie Montanez, that was my guy.
I still have my Roberto Clemente jersey from childhood. So, we all have that first one. Yeah.
Glenn, talk to us a little bit about sport journalism, sports talk show today, where it was and where it is now. It seems like there's a degree of shock jock, have the next hot take, get loud, screaming A. Smith the way he covers sports. In your opinion, where are we today with sports journalism, sports talk shows, and the like?
Well, I think there's the full gamut of coverage. So, and we'll get to what you're describing in a moment, but I also think there's some very solid reporting, writing, journalism going on in sports, better than you used to have, because the people covering it are less and less people who view themselves necessarily as fans and there to promote the team, but people are there to do a good job. I'll say Jeff McClain locally does a great job of covering the Eagles. There are people who really know, who are journalists who are covering the teams. And there's substance. Part of, I guess I'm going to cover a wide array of things here. Part of the problem right now is newspapers don't have the resources they did when I was at the Inquirer. I was there in the late 80s, early 90s. And they had money and they had space for you to write, and the resources were there. Now it's not there as much. The other thing that has really impacted print media is social media, which is now there is more of a impetus to get it out first than to get it out right, or to get it out first than to get it out complete. And there's a rush to do your story in 140, I guess 288 characters. And that's not helping anybody. Right. I mean, listen, I, as much as anybody, can sit around and watch Twitter scroll all day and be addicted to the drug of that, and I will sometimes, but you don't get the real meaty reporting and writing. I miss that. As far as television, yeah, I know of what you speak. The ESPN, two guys screaming each other in a room, seeming to have very, very contrived opinions. And that's really a shame to me. Again, there's still people who do it very, very well. But the Skip Bayless, and I'm friends with Stephen A. Smith, so I'll leave him out of it. But
Screaming A. He is very smart. He decided, I'm going to hate America's team because they always talk about Dallas. I think he really loves Dallas, but he's going to hate them. And now he gets all this additional coverage of his hate.
So Stephen is very smart in that he created a character for himself, right? And I'm not trying to say this in a negative way, because it's obviously really worked for him and it's very popular. And he, Stephen takes his real opinion and then kind of jacks it up by about 150%, puts it on steroids. Yeah, I'm real weary of those shows. And you have to search harder to find what you want. But the good news is there's very good radio. There are really good podcasts around. What you do, there are a lot of people who do it in sports who are great at it. My colleague Ross Tucker has a couple of great podcasts.
Yes.
It's there. It's there. You just gotta sift through the jungle of dung to find the good stuff.
Wow. On point. Glenn, as a professional speaker, consultant, I've worked with clients, corporate folks all the time. And one of the questions I'm commonly asked is, what problem do you solve? What problem do you solve? And I give them the answer because I'm a presentation skills, leadership, authenticity expert. But in your role, you do myriad, you're a modern day Renaissance man. In your work, what problem do you solve?
Well, I have sometimes thought about the fact that, I have a brother-in-law whose job is to expand the use of electrical cars. He's solving world problems, okay? I have a friend of mine whose job is to work with kids who have real psychological problems. He's solving the world's problems. So I have over the years thought, like, what the hell good am I doing in the world? And what I have reconciled that I am doing is I am in days when things can be pretty tough and pretty bleak and people can be pretty upset, I can make people's lives a little more fun. And if I can make people smile, if people can turn me on the radio and, maybe find that their troubles go away for an hour, or that we all root for this common thing that is a football team and things like that, or I serve them good beer. I reconciled that I'm not exactly solving the world's problems, but I'm at least helping people cope with theirs.
Well, you certainly help me. I listen every Saturday and every Sunday. But you just mentioned beer. When did this love for beer begin? And the ideal of perhaps one day owning your own bar?
So I've been a beer fan, drinker, not young, probably late 20s, early 30s. I started to appreciate beer, and I started to appreciate that there was better beer out there than the swill that I drank in college because it was $2.40 a case, right? That there was good stuff.
A case? What?
Well, maybe a little more than that. I think when I was in college, I could get a case for $5. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
Milwaukee's finest, whatever it was. But I started to appreciate the taste of good beer, and I had a couple of friends, and we would go out 2 or 3 times a year and find a really good beer bar. And my friend, who's a dentist, said, someday we're going to own a brewery. And I said, yeah, sure we are. And then we'd go out 6 months later and we'd be enjoying beer somewhere. He'd say, someday we're going to own our own brewery. And I'd say, yeah, I bet. And then we went out one time and he said, someday we're going to own a brewery. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, and that day is now.
Yes.
He had done the work. He had found a great brewer, a local guy who had worked for Yards, who had ended up out in Oregon and wanted to come back home. And he had found more seed money than the rest of us could raise, which was kind of needed.
Really good. Nice.
Yeah, right. And we worked and found a location and put together a business plan. And in 2014, we opened our first brewery. I'm wearing the shirt here, Conshohocken Brewing Company in Conshohocken, and we've grown since then. We have 4 locations, and you can buy us in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, all the way down to the shore, all the way up to the Lehigh Valley. And we make a good product. And when I invested enough money that, well, I'll put it this way. I didn't invest too much money that if it went under, my kids would have no inheritance.
Okay.
But it was enough money that there was always a seat at the bar for me. And that's it. And that's grown into a TV show about beer, if you want to talk about that I do. And I've really enjoyed it because I enjoy beer and I enjoy sharing beer and the arcana of talking about beer with people.
I love it. We have a brief video of you talking about your love of beer.
It's Glen Macnow, and I'm going to answer these 3 questions. Why do I like drinking beer in Philadelphia? Well, this is a city that's got a diverse, active beer scene with more than a dozen great breweries, and geez, it seems like there's a great craft beer place on every corner. What was the second question? Oh, my first beer crush. And the first craft beer I had was I was 21 years old, maybe 20, maybe 19. Went to California and had my first Sierra Nevada, which, let's be honest, that might be the first craft beer in America. And I enjoyed that a lot more than the regular swill you could get at the times. And the third question is my favorite beer memory. Well, hey, I'm a partner in the Conshohocken Brewing Company. So my favorite beer memory, April 2014. We opened, I went there the first day. Scott, the bartender, drew me a nice, tall IPA. That was manna from heaven, baby.
Wow.
I love it.
Research.
I love it. Come on, Glenn. You do the best research. You're my mentor. I'm just following what you.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great stuff. There you go.
If I start coming there, will I become a norm where everyone knows my name?
Yeah, we do like that. And we do have that. And it is something, we are all of our places, and particularly one in Conshohocken, which really is like a corner tap room. And there's a good group of regulars. Everybody is always welcome. Newbies are always invited. But our bartender now kind of knows, let me put it this way, your third time in, he will know what you want as your first beer.
Nice. I'm an IPA guy, so we'll check it out.
We do those.
When you have a question from the audience, it says, with all the changes in sports media, journalism and television over the years, how have you been able to evolve and be so successful and relevant all these years? So again, with all the changes in sports media, journalism, and television over the years, how have you been able to evolve and be so successful and relevant all these years?
Wow, that's a very nice compliment. I don't know that I would even put it that way about myself, but I appreciate that. I think it's because I don't try to be what I'm not. And I know I'm not young anymore. So if I have evolved, it is into a bit of an elder statesman. And this is something I learned a lot from my friend Ray Didinger. I'm sure we'll talk about Ray, who never tried to be what he wasn't, right? You do your homework, you talk to people, you get out there. There's my pal. You get out there, but you don't try to fake it when you don't know it. So I've evolved into accepting the fact that I am not a millennial and I am who I am. So I don't know if that answers the question well, but it is how I try to live.
Oh, to me, it really speaks to authenticity, and we'll be talking about that momentarily. But you mentioned Ray Didinger. You guys, now I know you've worked with a number of co-hosts, but the energy, synergy that you have brought tears to my eyes last year when Ray retired, and I listened to all the shows of people calling in, thanking him. But how did that chemistry form? It's almost like you're one person. You're Glenn and Ray.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you it's a bit of a stroke of luck. So the way it all came down, and I'm certainly have no problem talking about it, is I was doing afternoon drive at WIP back in the late 90s, early 2000, and the program director decided he wanted a change, and the change meant that kind of 3 or 4 shows were affected, and one guy got bumped from this show to that show, one guy got bumped to another show, and I got bumped to evenings, which at the time was a demotion. At the time I was pretty upset about. And they said to me, as part of this, you have to do one shift during the weekend. We feel kind of lousy what we're doing to you, so you can pick any single show you want to do on the weekend. So I looked at the shows and I thought, okay, well, this guy's, I don't know if I could work with him. And this show, well, I don't want to work Saturday night. And Ray was doing 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. And I knew Ray a little bit. We had shared time in press boxes. We had flown a couple flights together to, Eagles games or something. I knew him just a bit. And I thought, well, I certainly respect him on the air and respect his expertise. I think we could get along well. So we started doing it, and it's like moving in with the roommate who suddenly becomes your best friend. The chemistry developed really quickly, I think, just because we appreciated each other, liked each other, got along well, decided we wanted to do our show different from most shows, which was we took fewer calls and spent more time just kind of chatting. The premise of our show was we're two guys sitting at the corner bar having a beer, or in Ray's case, a Diet Coke, okay? And we're going to have a conversation, and you're invited to eavesdrop in the conversation. Or if you're really moved, you're invited to call up or, walk into the conversation. But we decided we're going to talk about anything. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about movies. We're going to talk about living in the city. We're going to talk about whatever. And he and I never had a moment when it felt like work. It just was two friends chatting. I'll give you one day that I will always remember.
Sure.
It was in a real dead period of the year, like June, when there's nothing going on. The Sixers weren't good then, and the Phillies weren't good. There's no football. There's nothing to talk about. And I was the guy who always laid out the shows. That was part of my job, is I would say, okay, here's the topics, lay them out. We'll talk to this guest at this time. Ray had enough going on. And I remember coming in and saying, Ray, I got nothing today. I got nothing. And he said, yeah, don't worry about it. And we just went on the air at 10, turned on the microphone, started talking. And it was one of the best shows we ever did. And there was zero prep for the show because God bless Ray, we just were so comfortable together and I think it came across as two friends chatting. And it's the goal that you want to get. And I was blessed enough to find it with him.
That is amazing. I've had the good fortune to meet Ray a couple of times. As you know, he was on this show, and I'm going to reach out to him and see if we can have a Tuesdays with Maury experience, Fridays with Ray, where once a month we'll have some lunch or something like that. Well, you and Ray had a wonderful relationship, and you still do. But you also now work with, again, Mac and Mac, Jody McDonald. Tell me about the relationship that you and Jody McDonald have. And we have a picture of you and Jody as well. Tell me about the relationship.
Could be an old one. I don't know. Yeah, that one's probably a good 15, 20 years old. Jody's already lost his hair there, but there you go. So Jody was the guy when I started at WIP right at the end of 1993, moving into 1994. Jody was the guy with whom they paired me. Jody had done a show by himself, and WIP at the time was moving to two-guy shows. And they wanted Jody actually to work. Jody, I think I may not be exactly right. He was like 10 to 1, and they wanted to add hours to the shift, and they didn't want him to do it himself. So they kind of, to be honest, foisted me upon him. And I don't know if initially Jody was delighted with it because it wasn't his pick. And it took us a while to get a chemistry, but we did. Jody is a great guy because, first of all, Jody has an amazing retentive mind for sports and knows everything. Yeah. You can ask Jody, the third line left winger for the Winnipeg Jets, and it's there. He's got it, right? But more than that, because a lot of people can do that, but they aren't entertaining. Jody can tell a story and really well tell a story. Jody has a self-deprecating sense of humor. He doesn't mind making fun of himself. Jody's got a lot of tics and a lot of shtick, and some of it on purpose and some of it just not, but really funny.
Do me a favor, Jody.
Yeah. So I worked with Jody for about 6 or 7 years back in those days. At that time, Jody, he left for WFAN, and then he's kind of come back. And Jody and I would always make sure we did at least one show a year together. We'd do like a reunion show. But when Ray left, and I really appreciate this about the station manager came to me and he said, Ray's retiring. It's your show. What do you want to do? And that was not everybody gets that from their boss. And I wanted to do 2 shows actually to replace Ray with 2 people. And I know we'll talk about Mike in a minute.
Yes.
But getting the opportunity to work back with Jody, and I said it at the time, and I don't know that Jody took it the right way, but I mean it in a good way. It's like putting on a pair of comfortable old shoes.
Yeah.
It fits right away. It was natural. You don't have to worry about the chemistry because it's already there. There are many, many listeners who remember it and enjoyed it. And it just was like, putting on a sweater, pair of old shoes, just like real comfort level. Jody is radio comfort food.
Yeah. And now you have a nice robe that you wear on Saturdays from 10 to 1 with Mike Selesky. And that chemistry is really good. I was surprised how quickly you guys came to fit together.
So Mike's another guy who I know from the press box, and we would have conversations. I would have Mike as a guest on the show often, and Mike is. I wanted to find the closest I could find to Ray.
You did.
Yes, right. So there's not Ray. Ray's Ray. Ray's a unicorn. Ray's a one of a kind. But I wanted to find somebody who was smart, really verbal, who had been in this town for his whole life. Mike grew up in Bucks County, went to LaSalle. He's local. He gets all the local stuff. Writes terrific columns, speaks really well, and again, the chemistry is something that you don't always know. And it was a little bit more of a risk with Mike because we had not worked together, and Mike had never done talk radio before.
Ooh.
But I wanted somebody who had never done talk radio before. I wanted somebody who was going to just bring a whole new approach to it. And I'm very fortunate because I think Mike is extremely talented. And I've said to Mike, I'm not going to be doing this forever. I'm in my 60s. I'm not ready to retire, but I'm not going to do it forever. I would love it, 5 years, 7 years, whenever I'm done, if Mike continues in that spot, because I think Mike does a great job.
Yes, he does. Well, let's think about highs and lows during this journey to now, whether it was college, whether it's political writing, whether it was writing for the Enquirer, pregame show hosts, the great sports debate, all the shows you've been a part of. What's been your highest high, and what's been your lowest low throughout this journey?
Well, the highest high is probably the parades. Getting the opportunity to broadcast, and the Phillies, I guess, would be the one I talk about first, because Philadelphia had a 25-year drought between the 83 Sixers and the 2008 Phillies. That's 4 teams, 25 seasons. That's easy math. That's 100 seasons without a championship, without a parade. And I moved to Philadelphia in the end of 1986. And I heard oh man, this city throws the greatest championship parades. That was just a rumor to me. Okay. I mean, I know how great the fans were. And year after year, disappointment, and the Eagles losing in the NFC Championship games, and the Phillies losing in '93 to Toronto, and all the Flyers in the finals. And when the Phillies won that in 2008, it was like somebody had taken a large magnet of champagne, shaken it on a paint stirrer, right?
Wow.
You put on one of those paint stirrers for 25 years and then released it, and the city blew up in a good way. And I went down to cover that parade from the top of the Union League, looking down at the Phillies floats, broadcasting it live. And I got to tell you, it was magic. It was great. And then I got to do it again with the Eagles when they won the parade. So I would say those two things are about as good as it gets.
And everything you described, I'm born and raised in Philly. I've seen it all. So I'm feeling your depiction of those moments. So thank you for that. Any lows? Any time where you wanted to say love?
I'll give you the low, which is obviously a low, but it's something that I really feel fortunate in a certain way that I got to do. September 11th, 2001, I'm driving to work, and I'm listening to our morning show. And Al Morganti, I remember exactly what's happening. They're interviewing Sugar Ray Leonard on the air. Angelo is asking the questions, and Al's got one eye on the TV and sees the first of the Twin Towers fall. And nobody exactly knows what it is, but Al Morganti breaks into the interview and starts saying what he's seeing on TV. And this is clear that this is a horrible thing.
Wow.
I drove to, I remember I was doing the show then with Anthony Gargano, and we were doing it from a restaurant in Port Richmond. We were doing a remote broadcast, and we went there, and we got there around 9:15. We're going to be on the air at 10, and we're watching television. And as we're watching is when the second tower goes down. And we realize, at first you think like, well, it was an accident. And then you realize with the second one, it was not an accident. And we have to go on the air. And nobody knows what's going on. And people are calling up crying, and people have relatives in New York. And everybody's afraid. Is the country at war? Are we being attacked? And we just had to kind of talk our way through it. It was like we were all sharing this deeply psychological experience together. And we did it that day and the next day and the day after that. And I felt, you asked me what I find rewarding. And again, I don't do, I didn't rebuild the roads and the towers, and I didn't save people as an EMT. So I want to make it not sound at all like that. But I feel that I got to help be part of the discussion and then the healing. And as much of as it was a down because it was just horrible, it was very gratifying to me to be able to be part of the community that fostered sharing and healing for that.
Sure. Wow, I remember. Thank you. There's another question. It says from the audience, what's your approach to interviewing a professional athlete? And has that changed since when she started? Any memorable interviews? So again, what's your approach to interviewing a professional athlete? I would even add best interview. What's your approach to interviewing a professional athlete? And has that changed since when you arrived, since you started? Any memorable interviews?
Yeah, I can give you a couple. My favorite interview has always been Charles Barkley, more than once. And I was one time had Charles Barkley on the show when he said I think it was the first time he said that he wanted to be traded, and soon after that was.
Wow.
But and I'll get back to the first part of the question in a minute. Let me give you my favorite Charles Barkley story, because this may anticipate another question. People ask who's my all-time favorite athlete in town, and he's one of them. I can give you the others, but here's why I love Charles Barkley. And this is not so much an interview as just kind of being with him. This was the radio station sent us down to cover the NCAA Final Four in New Orleans.
Okay.
And so it's over, and we're back at the airport the next morning, and happen to be on the same plane as Charles Barkley. So we're waiting. This is me and again Anthony. We walk to the gate, and we see he's there, and he's Charles Barkley, right? So he can't go anywhere where people don't know him and know who he is. And a lot of those guys will shy away from that and try to find a place in the corner, put on a pair of sunglasses, and that's their right. That's fine. They just want to be alone. That's certainly their right. Charles, meanwhile, is engaged in a argument with his colleague Jim Gray.
Wow.
And a woman comes up to him, Maggie from Topeka in the airport, right? It's like a 65-year-old woman, very polite, and she's going to ask him for his autograph. And he says to her, "What's your name?" And she says, "I'm Maggie from Topeka." "Listen, Maggie, Jim Gray here says that," I don't remember what the argument was, that, "these guys are doing this, and I think he's wrong. What do you think?" And Maggie goes, "I think I agree with you." And he goes, "See, Jim, see?" And then he starts pulling people from around the airport who are all watching him because he's Charles Barkley, right? And he says, "You, sir, what's your name?" "Well, I'm Dr. James." "Well, Dr. James, let me ask you a question. Do you think that," and he's engaged, he's got the whole gate of people talking. And it's something, and I've seen him do that more than once. And it's something that I always loved about Charles Barkley is he never shied from his fame and his personality. And he really likes and brings out people. It's a reason that he was always one of my favorite autographs. Reggie White was one of my favorite autographs. Reggie White was somebody with whom I very much disagreed on certain issues, very much disagreed. Reggie had some philosophies in life that I don't, but you could talk about those things with Reggie. And you could disagree without it becoming disagreeable. These days, everything is so polarized. Everybody's in their camp. With Reggie, it would be, well, I don't disagree with you, but I hear your point. And I loved interviewing him. One of the favorite ones I ever got to do was when Charlie Manuel was manager of the Phillies. We used to have a weekly thing where he would come out to Ponzio. We did the show at Ponzio's Diner in Jersey.
Yeah.
Tremendous diner, by the way.
Yes.
I miss doing the show at Ponzio's. Anyway, so Charlie Manuel would come out for an hour every Tuesday. And I remember when we started it, we would ask Charlie Manuel questions like normal, like, Skip, the other day you batted Utley third and this happened and so on. And he wasn't very good at that. It wasn't good in a kind of a question and answer format. But what we realized was Charlie was an amazing storyteller. And Charlie had lived this life where he had played in Japan and he had met Ted Williams and he like all these things that happened to him in his life. And he could tell a story about his father passed away when he was young. And his mother said, well, now you're the head of the household. And there were 8 younger brothers and sisters. He got a scholarship to play at Penn and had to turn it down to support his family, like all these things. But if you just kind of would let Charlie go and let him tell stories, and every once in a while kind of, move the direction to make sure he stayed on, he was great. So the interviews I loved are the ones where the speaker did all the work.
What's your approach? I've heard you interview myriad people, Ryan Prop, Bernie Perrant,
yeah,
a number of Gary Maddox, number of people. As the question says, what's your approach? What's Glen Macnow's special sauce to pulling out the facts, the stories, the animation, the illustrations in that individual's life?
Well, the number one thing, and this is what I've taught journalism. It's the number one thing of anything is be amazingly prepared. Know everything, do the research, know everything about the guy, so that you know where the fertile ground is, the questions to go, and if somebody starts to talk about something, where to go next. And by the way, people tend to appreciate when what you're talking about as you interview them. They're clearly more likely to give you more if you say, oh, I didn't know you went to college there. They want to believe that you're holding up your end of it. So that's the number one thing. And the other thing, and listen, we're doing this right now, and I appreciate what you're doing now is listening skills, because you'll go into an interview and you'll always have, I'm going to use a prop here, right? You'll have your list of questions, and this is the ground I want to cover, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. But the guy who you're interviewing, he's not always going by that same thing. So if something comes up in the interview, you got to be ready to veer to that direction or not miss it, because sometimes somebody will, you'll think, okay, we're going to talk about this part of his life, and all of a sudden this gem will come up. I'll give you an example. One of the Tell Us Your Stories we did was with Larry Anderson, the Phillies broadcaster, former Major League. LA, everybody loves LA, right? And we were talking to LA about his youth, and essentially we were going to talk about, how did you end up going from being a player who was a kid to going to the minor leagues, like that transition. And what I didn't know, and LA, I don't know that he ever talked about it publicly, was LA's dad was a pilot. And when LA was in high school, actually a little younger, high school, 15, his dad got killed in a plane crash.
Ooh.
And I never knew that. And I don't think people knew that. I don't think he's talked about that. And so we're doing this interview with LA, and all of a sudden he starts to talk about that. And Ray and I realize, we have to follow this where it's going. We have to let this breathe. We have to let him talk about this. He got very choked up. He got really understandably talking about his dad passing away when he was a teenager and how it impacted him. And it's the kind of thing where if I was just looking at my list of questions and said, okay, so then you played minor league ball in Spokane, it would have gone by. And instead we were able to really get a really solid man talking about an impactful moment of his life.
I feel that. I feel that. Wow. And he was being very authentic, which leads me to my next question. I've done my doctoral work. My research is on authenticity at work. When Andy Reid was the Eagles coach after the game, if they lost, Andy would always say, I have to do a better job. I have to put them in position. He gave us nothing. I remember when I believe it was the Heat the first year LeBron was on there, they lost to Dallas. They interviewed LeBron after the game. And essentially he said, life goes on. I'm going home to my big house, my beautiful wife, my kids, the fans, hey, they're going back to their 9 to 5. And he got crushed for that. Can a player, can a coach share their truth to the media, to the fans, or do they have to always couch it and spin it in quotes? And Jalen Hurts gets criticized for always sharing quotes and thoughts about, there's a very colloquial but not heartfelt, meaningful. Can we be authentic players and coaches with regard to our communication?
The answer lies somewhere in the middle, but more no than yes, unfortunately. Because listen, it's a 24-hour-a-day media cycle with print media, radio media, TV media, blog media, social media right at the top of that list that can take something and spin that baby in 27 different ways so that the guy who originally said it may not even recognize what he said, certainly will not have the meaning of what he said. I mean, I'll just give you just an example. It's not what somebody said, but it's something I saw this weekend. So the Eagles beat the Giants, crushed the Giants the other night, and toward the end of the game, it was great. Toward the end of the game, there's a shot of A.J. Brown on the sideline, and Nick goes over to A.J. and starts to talk to him to console him. You can see A.J.'s really upset and almost brushes him away. So I start getting messages on my social media from people like, what is A.J. upset about? Boy, what a bad teammate he is. He's not even happy that they win. And that's not it. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I think what we pretty know well what happened, but the Eagles aren't saying it in detail, is he got hurt in that game. He got shaken up in that game. He didn't get to contribute as much as he wanted, and he was upset at the moment. Yeah. He is certainly not so selfish to think, well, the Eagles won, but I didn't have 6 catches. But things get spun that way. So if A.J. Brown says anything remotely the wrong thing, he's going to get killed for days. So the answer, there's a great scene in Bull Durham, one of my favorite sports movies, where Kevin Costner, who's the veteran catcher, is riding on the bus, and he's giving the minor leaguers lessons in how to talk to the media. And it's like, okay, number 1, I'm just happy to be there. Number 2, any way I can help my team. And the cliches. And they are incredibly boring and sometimes useless, but I get it. So the answer is it's really hard for a guy to be authentic. Some guys can do it. Chris Long, when he was here with the Eagles, I think was at the point of his career where he had accomplished so much that I don't give a damn. I think Jason Kelsey's kind of that way. He's kind of reached the point of untouchability. He can say whatever he wants and people will know it. But if you're a young player, young coach, if you're Nick, you got to be careful what you say.
So on Sunday, Mike McCarthy couldn't have come out and said, Dak Prescott, he chilled us again, 2 interceptions, as 12 and 4 games. What?
No, he can't, because it's a good way for him to get fired. Yeah. So instead, what he did is he shoved a cameraman at the end of the game in anger. I don't know if you saw that, but leaving the field, the cameraman is trying to get the shot of him leaving the field, and he just shoved over the cameraman. And listen, with coaches more than anybody, they have to do it. And the Andy stuff used to frustrate us. I was the guy, I was on the shift where we would play his Monday news conference, and Jody McDonald and I, and then we talk before it and we talk after it. And every time we were just frustrated, like, he gave us nothing. I got to do a better job. What do you think of your wide receivers? Well, they're fine. It's me. And they were. The wide receivers were terrible. And I've talked to my pal Ike Reese about it, Ike having played for that team. And what Ike said is, we all appreciated, we knew when we screwed up. And Andy would tell us we screwed up. He was not going to pull punches in his meetings with us, but he was protecting us. And as a player, you appreciate that more than anything.
I love it. Glen, time is running. It's so much to cover with you. We haven't even gotten into your books, got into your food contest, got into your interview.
Don't do the food contest anymore. My wife put me on a strict diet, so the food contests, those aren't happening.
Oh, you mentioned Judy. You mentioned Judy. I think we have a picture of you and Judy. I want you to talk about Judy and the role she's played in this journey from Boston University.
Wow.
All
Look
the
at that.
way
That's
to,
that is the two of us when we started dating in college. Look at that hair on me. She hasn't, if you notice, she has not changed a bit. And then that's us when we won the Hamilton lottery a couple of years ago. Very nice.
I love it.
So my wife and I met in college, and I am a very fortunate man in that through 7 moves into 5 states over the years. She always kind of kept it all going. My wife had a very good career of her own. She owned a business that was a summer camp consulting business that did really well. Actually, I enjoyed when she had her business because I would take 2 weeks in the summer and just kind of get in the car and drive her around to summer camps in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And she would talk to the directors, and I would sit by the lake and do a crossword puzzle and, watch the sun. But she's great. And we're really fortunate. We have 2 great sons, two grown men with families of their own. And I got 3 little grandsons, and that's the greatest part of it all. Well, there you go. That's the Macnow men. That's us. That's my dad, my 2 sons, and my 3 grandsons are in there. Yeah, there you go. Even the little one.
I love it. I love it.
We take that picture every Thanksgiving.
Hashtag stealing that ideal. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have one more question. Audience, what advice would you give a young Glen Macnow looking to get into the sports journalism industry today? So we have a guy who's graduating from, or a gal graduating from Boston University or whatever school.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a young Glenna or Glen Macnow looking to get into the sports journalism industry today?
Work harder than anybody in the room. Meet everybody. Network as much as you can. Don't take bull from people. Stand up, be tough, believe in yourself, practice your craft, learn from smart people. Particularly if you want to write, read great writing, and then try to break down why you think it's great. Don't get frustrated. And when you get your first job, immediately start looking for your second job, because the second job is the one that's usually the launching pad.
I love it. You mentioned great writing. Can you give us a little sense of what has gone into all these best-selling books that you have written individually, you've written with Ray? I think we have a picture of you as one of your books. What has gone into all of this phenomenal work?
Well, that's the one I wrote with the late great Big Daddy Graham, which was
Big Daddy.
I miss him all the time. Well, one of the things that's gone into great books is one of the same things that's gone into my work is I find good partners. So I wrote a book with Ray. I wrote a book with Big Daddy. I wrote a book with Angelo. I wrote a book with Anthony. So here's my other advice for everybody. Find smart people to be around because they'll make you smarter. And just the other part of it is I really love writing. I love the craft of writing. I love sitting at a keyboard, typing something, coming back in 2 hours, making it better. You have to love doing it. That is, boy, what a nice picture that is. That was the book release for the book I wrote with Big Daddy. And as you can see, well, I don't know that you can see it, but between the time we wrote the book and the book came out, Big Daddy had the accident that left him paralyzed. And all of those people there, that's all of our colleagues who came out that night to support us, but really him, because it was such a lovely gesture. We had a great book release, and that was a really that picture is really getting in my heart because it meant a lot. He was a great friend.
I'm feeling the tissue issue there. I'm feeling the tissue issue.
Yeah.
Wow. Glen, as we get ready to wind down, this hour has flown by. Please answer this question for me. Why does the national media hate us? As Jason Kelsey said, they don't like us and we don't care. They still talk about
so we do care. Why? We do. we were a little thin-skinned. It's because of the cliches that will not go away. It's because in 1968, somebody's grandfather threw a snowball at a drunken Santa Claus at an Eagles game, and the thing, which was regarded at the time as kind of a joke, even the Santa was laughing, became this national narrative of how nasty we are. Because sometimes we will play that up on our own end, and because this is what I thought, because I was lucky enough to move to Philadelphia as an adult. Okay, I didn't grow up here, and I know people who grew up here. I think people who had the opportunity to move here actually appreciate Philadelphia more than people who lived there their whole lives. So I moved here. I grew up in Buffalo, went to school in Boston. I worked down in Florida, a little bit in Washington, then Detroit, and then came here. So I've been around. And Philadelphia is the greatest place ever. I was fortunate to raise my kids here, have my career. I love it. But Philadelphia, to me, is the 75-watt light bulb that's between the 100-watt light bulb in New York and Washington. We're not the nation's capital. We're not the business and entertainment center of the world. We have these two big sister cities looking down at us, and therefore we're not them. So I think that was the inferiority complex that we get a little bit, and the national media will play into. I love this town and always have. And as I said, I'm just privileged to have lived here and to have been able to work here for all these years.
Wow. Glenn, finish this sentence. What the world needs now
is love, sweet love. Can I quote Dionne Warwick? No, well, I mean, it really is. What the world needs now, I mean, I guess we're going to get serious, is for people to listen to each other more, to tolerate each other more, and to stop being in their own camps. It's not, this country particularly, to me, is divided into our team, your team, and the country shouldn't be about, it's fine in sports when we have the rivalries, but it's not so fine in politics and social life and religion and so on. So tolerance, baby.
Respect and understanding.
Yeah.
Glenn, since I'm a professional speaker, I ask all of our guests to conclude the show by giving us a 30-second inspirational, motivational keynote. My keynotes are usually 60, 70 minutes, 90 minutes on the stage, no notes, and really driving home the point to help change that company, help take them to greater levels. We're going to give you the mic. We're going to ask you to lean closer. And as you think about what you shared with us the last hour, what your wish for us is, what's happening in your life, sports world, just life in general, give us 30 seconds from Glen Macnow on inspiration.
Okay, I'm going to keep mine very narrow focused and simple and not quite as lofty as some of the things we've talked about. Eagles fans, your team is playing this weekend for a chance to get back to the Super Bowl again. I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to beat the Niners. They're a better team. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell you that this is going to be easy, because it will be a competitive game. But your team, led by a very smart young coach and a brilliant young quarterback, the best offensive line in the NFL, and a team that came within 2 sacks of the league record, plus a strong secondary and 70,000 screaming fans, is going to give you reason to celebrate on Sunday, and 2 weeks from then in Arizona. And then 2 days after that, I'll see you at the parade on Broad Street. That's as inspirational as
L-E-S-E-God.
Doc, that's as inspirational as I can get.
That was awesome. I'm coughing because I caught a cold Saturday when I was out at the game. And I guess my immune system is telling me it's not as powerful as it once was. I'm still recovering from Saturday. I'm looking forward to this upcoming Saturday. I hope your prophecy comes to fruition. I believe it will. But Glenn, I know your schedule is crazy busy. Thank you for making the time to share your wisdom, your experiences, your pearls with us. Thank you very much.
Dr. James, great, really fun. I really enjoyed the hour. Thank you so much for having me. My best to all your listeners and everybody.
Thank you.
Viewers.
And listen, folks, I tell you every week, informational, transformational experiences. I keep telling you to bring more people back to watch it. This is good stuff. Glen Macnow dropped the mic throughout the hour. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. And remember, you've just been gym packed. See you later.